You're watching Reality Check. There have been multiple concerns about the fact that India and Indian states are undercounting deaths, and these reports have particularly swirled around the state of Gujarat, which appears to be having a hidden and serious mortality crisis. The official death count of Gujarat puts the number currently at close to about 9,000 deaths, but multiple ground reports as well as terrific reporting by the Gujarati press and by Twitter users like Deepak Patel have uncovered the gap between the official statistics and how a number of other indicators are putting up red flags that the death count may be higher. Take for instance something that many of these newspapers and journalists have pointed out, which is the obituaries in the Gujarati press, and the obituaries have skyrocketed. They've almost jumped by 800% in 2 months. In the newspaper Saurashtra Samachar's Bhavnagar edition, the edition from the city of Bhavnagar, on the 10th of March there were just 26 obituaries. On the 10th of May there were 232 obituaries of the kind that you're seeing on your screen, just page after page chronicling multiple deaths of the loved ones of families. Now, this anomaly has also been brought to light again by the Gujarati press and by portals like the Leaflet, which has been looking at the huge number of gaps in the death certificates that have been issued. The death certificates appear to have doubled during the second COVID wave, and the official tally doesn't match. There could be as many as 61,000 quote-unquote hidden or mystery deaths. The death certificates issued in a particular period between the 1st of March and the 10th of May in 2020, that is last year, was 58,000 death certificates. But in the same period in this year, in 2021, that number has jumped to 1.2 lakhs. So there's been an increase of 66,000 deaths according to these death certificates. But the official records for the same period, from the 1st of March to the 10th of May, is only showing 4,200 deaths. So 66,000 deaths on the certificate and only 4,200 COVID deaths, which is a huge gap, and that is something which hasn't been fully understood. Further, what some of these newspapers and Twitter handles like Deepak Patel are doing are literally counting in district after district the number of official deaths versus what they are finding in terms of crematoria records and so on and so forth. In one day in May, at least 201 deaths were not counted in 10 of 33 districts in the state. So on the 20th of May, the official records showed 30 deaths. But the local media, Gujarat Samachar, Sandesh and people like Deepak Patel, reported 231 deaths. So that's almost 7 times as many deaths that the local media found in these 10 Gujarat districts on a single day. And let's look at which are these districts where the deaths are not being counted. Which are these 10 districts? Vadodara 85, Bhavnagar 33, Jamnagar 20, Gir Somnath 16, Rajkot 15, Gandhinagar 12, Kheda 7, Valsad 6, Aravali 5, Surat 2. These appear to be all the deaths that are not getting captured. Okay, let's go to panel. Joined at the moment by Dr. Murad Banerjee, Senior Lecturer in Mathematics at Middlesex University in London. He's been doing a lot of number crunching on COVID numbers and COVID deaths. Asif Bhamla, spokesperson BJP of Maharashtra. Amiben Yagnik, Rajya Sabha MB of the Congress is here. We'll be getting other voices as well in just a second. But let me just start with you, Murad Banerjee. You have been looking at this phenomenon of the undercounting of deaths, not just in Gujarat but everywhere. And this is not the first time that the Gujarat has raised red flags, but we are seeing a significant gap between the official figures and what all these other sources of data like death certificates and so on are throwing up. One estimate, as I said, suggested a gap of almost 60,000 deaths unexplained.
Yes, indeed. First of all, I suppose one should clarify that in 2020, because of national lockdown, it's possible that there were unregistered deaths or delays to death registration. So perhaps instead of looking at 2020 data and comparing it to 2021, we should look back a bit further to historical data and say, how many deaths would you expect in that period of time? So, in a 71-day period of time from the 1st of March to the 10th of May. And historical data says you should expect about 80,000, 80, 82, right. 84. So, roughly that many. And what you actually saw was almost 124,000, 1.2 lakhs, and a little bit more than that. So you are seeing a mismatch of about 40,000 deaths with relative to historical data. And I feel that, obviously, as you've pointed out, that's a vastly different figure from the 4,000 recorded COVID deaths during this period. But it's also very consistent with all the other reports that you've talked about, with reports from crematoria, reports about COVID protocol funerals versus actually recorded deaths. So it's a mismatch, which is huge, it's shocking, it's a tragedy, but at the same time, it's not entirely unexpected based on the other data we've been seeing.
Okay. Right. So you've gone even further back than 2020, because you said 2020 was a lockdown, so it wasn't entirely sure if that's the accurate period, but you went back a year further and there's still a huge discrepancy. Mr. Asif Bhamla, what do we make of this? I mean, some of it could just be because of the fact that we have very poor diligence when it comes to recording deaths, but is there also an attempt to suppress these death numbers artificially? Because it's embarrassing for the Rupani government.
You see, there has always been a fluctuating trend, and we've been noticing that. As we all know that 91% discharge rate is there of the total cases, and we are aware that there is nearly 7,12,900 patients recovered, and under quarantine you have 3,10,000. So the recovery rate is certainly improving. I mean, the ratios, you see, there are certain
recovery rate is different issue. Recovery rate is different.
Let me complete. Let me first complete, then you can interject. I have not even started off, okay? Yeah, appreciate that. So, you see, the issue here is that even the natural deaths with comorbidities also can't be considered as COVID deaths, is something which we certainly understand. But at the same time, if you see, in districts like Dahod, Kheda, Narmada, Sabarkantha, there has been a fluctuating trend. So the state is trying to implement in itself.
One second. I'm saying
the
that
preventive measures.
I'm saying that there's the comorbidity.
If you see,
one second. On the comorbidity thing, hold on, just a second. On the comorbidity, what you are saying basically is that what has been happening is, in Gujarat you have these district death committees, and they look at the deaths, and if they find that the person had severe comorbidities, prior to getting COVID in time of the admission, they discover these comorbidities, and it doesn't have a high amount of lung compromise because of the virus, then they will not label it as a COVID death. But even if you take that into account, look at this gap, Asif Bhamla, that death certificates issued have doubled from 58,000 to 1.2 lakhs. That's a gap of 61,000 deaths. That is not explained. That's the problem.
But
anyway, let me just go to
let me
Amiben Yagnik.
I agree that the positivity rates have been marginally increasing, but you also have to, you see, the only aspect is that it's very unfortunate that we only want to show the negative aspect of it. You see, these are troubled times, these are challenging times. It's very important to also show the positive sides.
Now we are not into... we are not on this positive business, Mr. Bhamla. Mr. Bhamla, hold on. The fact that overall the virus curve is improving in India, that caseload is falling, the positivity rate is coming down, we report that all the time. But at the same time, if there's undercounting of deaths, there is undercounting of deaths. You can't turn your eyes away from that. Amiben Yagnik, you believe, as Mr. Bhamla says, that we are not focusing on the positives, and that's the real issue here? Or is there some kind of political pressure as well, which is leading to these deaths not getting counted?
Srinivas, we are dealing here with a real ground level issue, and we are talking of deaths, and where we may look at the positive aspects which are gradually coming because the numbers of corona are going down. But 3 points. The reporting in several newspapers has shown that yes, there has been a high underreporting of the deaths. And the deaths the numbers are taken by the news reporters from the cremation grounds and the district authorities that register the deaths. And so that you cannot say that, well, these deaths have not happened.
Yes.
But of course, they have doubled in a sense. We may not go into the methodology which our expert has said, and he's also right that we may not look at the exact data of 2020, but we may go further down. But still, there's a very high rise in the deaths that have not been reported.
Correct.
That is one point. Because the deaths numbers have been taken from the cremation grounds in several districts and several regions. So they're region-wise. Second point, that if you will see that there are two matters going on in the Gujarat High Court.
Cremation grounds. Cremation grounds and also death certificates.
Yes. And the High Court also has said that
death certificates, cremation grounds and obituaries. Huge jump in obituaries.
Yes, and the death certificates and with the district authorities or the authorities thereby where people go and register these deaths. So there is an official data and authentic data, but still there is underreporting. Now, if the government says that we do not have the right data, well, that is completely wrong.
Official data, authentic data.
The Gujarat government.
Let me go across to Dr. Dilip Mavlankar, who's also on the show. He's the Director, Indian Institute of Public Health in Gandhinagar. A public health expert, has also been at some point, I think, advising the Gujarat government. Dr. Mavlankar, thank you for joining us. How do you explain this huge gap between the official death count in Gujarat and all these other sources, death certificates and so on, the big jump in obituaries, which show that the death count may be much higher?
Yeah. So, Shri Srinivasan, what we need to understand is that death recording and registration and its analysis in not only Gujarat but whole of India is roughly about 350 years behind Europe. Europe had better registration of death in 1665 when plague epidemics were happening. Every week the deaths were totaled, analyzed by cause, age, and where they happened, printed and made public. That was the European system. Even now, Europe has a system called MOMO, which is weekly monitoring of overall mortality. They don't classify the European system, the MOMO system doesn't classify it as a COVID death or non-COVID death.
But Dr. Mavlankar, Dr. Mavlankar, sorry, I'm only jumping in here for a second to say that there are two aspects to this. One is, you're right, there are systems when it comes to generally counting deaths, even in other times, non-pandemic, is bad. But this is a different phenomenon. These are the gap between the deaths which are getting counted, in the sense they are deaths taking place in the hospital, death certificates are being issued. Yes. But the number of COVID deaths seems to be much fewer than those that are getting counted as non-COVID deaths.
I was just coming to
the
that. What I am trying to say is,
but only a small fraction are getting counted as COVID deaths. Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, we have to show what is the high mortality.
Yes. Sorry,
so in the sense that we should, each city, not only in Gujarat, Delhi, Bombay, Chennai, should publish saying how many deaths happened yesterday. And is it normal, is it abnormal? Forget about COVID, non-COVID, whatever. If it is normal, then we are less worried.
Yeah.
But if it is 2 times the normal number of deaths, then we have to look why this increase in mortality has happened. And how many are COVID, how many are COVID with comorbidity, how many are other diseases. Because the third reason which people need to understand also is not availability of regular treatment. Because many hospitals are all blocked by COVID. Now somebody gets heart attack, somebody gets stroke, he may not get treatment. And that could also lead. Of course, the other side is accidental deaths and other deaths may have come down because traffic and
accidental deaths and all that is, that's also true. But there's another aspect, Murad, Banaji, which is that apart from the deaths that are getting logged in hospitals, and they may not all be counted as COVID deaths, though they might be COVID deaths, are the large number of people who are just dying in homes or sometimes even outside the hospitals, the COVID positive patients with COVID like symptoms, and that's a whole separate set of deaths that are not getting counted at all.
Yes, so I think there are two different kind of ways that we should think about undercounting. I think there's one which is more kind of deliberate and one which is more inadvertent maybe. So there's undercounting which happens because people die at home because perhaps they've never had access to testing. Perhaps there's no really way that their death can be logged as a COVID death, even if it was a death from COVID. So there's that kind of underreporting. And then there's the underreporting of people who actually die having tested positive, quite possibly even in a hospital, and yet the death gets attributed to comorbidities. And the first thing that we need to say is that that is in complete violation of ICMR guidelines, of WHO guidelines as well. This attribution of deaths to comorbidities is not the correct way to proceed. So if there are underlying other medical conditions that a patient has, you can mention that in the death certificate. That can be taken into account, but you still need to identify it as a COVID death if the patient has tested positive. And what I feel has been happening, based on a lot of different reports coming out of Gujarat, is that these audit committees that you mentioned have been misclassifying COVID deaths at a very high scale. And I have no doubt this happens in other states as well, but it feels like from the media reporting that it's happening at in a particularly major way in Gujarat, this misclassification of COVID deaths.
Okay, in a major way. Okay, right. Also joining us is Dr. J.P. Modi. He is Superintendent of Civil Hospital, Ahmedabad, one of the biggest government hospitals in the city. Dr. Modi, thank you for joining us. Dr. Modi, again, this question as to, is Gujarat drastically undercounting COVID deaths? Look at the number of death certificates issued, look at the huge jump in obituaries, and there's a mismatch between that and the official figures. What's going on, sir, in your view?
No, it's basically the deaths which are purely due to COVID, we are reporting them, and it's not like that, what you are saying. Whatever COVID deaths, we are all reporting them. Hello?
You are saying there's nothing like that? There's no deliberate undercounting? Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Yeah, why would
but then how do you explain this huge gap?
Pardon?
No, sir, because, sir, not you personally, but I'm saying that we understand how it works. No government wants to be seen as presiding over thousands of deaths. So,
no, but as you say,
there is always a sort of a perception.
Hello.
Right. So you're saying you can't hide things.
Yeah, because we have been reporting them as per the guidelines by ICMR, and we have been reporting deaths purely due to COVID positive and COVID positive with comorbid conditions.
Right.
We have been doing.
Okay, but you know, Asif Bhamla, isn't this, and let's just Asif. Okay, you say you've been doing that, Asif Bhamla. Let's put up those visuals again of these obituaries, because Asif Bhamla, the fact is that you cannot, beyond a point, hide the bodies, as they say. The bodies will turn up, whether it's on the banks of the Ganga or whether it turns up on the obituary pages or at crematoria. Isn't it a dangerous thing when states, and this applies to all states that are undercounting, you start to suppress the death figures, you then can't fight the virus because you're concealing the true extent of the virus.
This gentleman said that it's not as easy as you per se and foresee for cases to be hidden like this in a manner. Obviously, the states are, every state, I'm saying even Maharashtra and every state are doing well, they're trying, they're putting their might together to ensure that they fight this invisible enemy. So now if you see, I mean, if you talk about Gujarat also, I mean, it is trying to procure more and maximum vaccination. It just procured 16 lakh vaccinations of 52 crores for, between 18 to 44 age groups. So that is
Bamla, you could be fighting the virus, but you could also be trying to somewhat suppress or massage the death data. No, that's entirely, I mean, the two things aren't contradictory.
No, the vaccination reaches people, and vaccination is of utmost significance, which I think at this point in time, you see, the rest
vaccination is a very important thing. No one is taking away from that. But that's not the question tonight. The question is about the suppression of the death figures. Okay, Amiben Yagnik, we are very little short on time. Amiben Yagnik, you want to quickly come in? Is there any politics here, or you think this is all just?
We can't create politics.
Yes, go ahead.
There is nothing like a politics in this, because things, I mean, things at this stage and stature.
Okay, let her respond. Okay, Mr. Bamla, let her respond. Yes, come in, go ahead.
Yes. No, I may.
Yes, Mr. Bamla, go ahead.
I would like to bring only
yes,
two
Ms.
points.
Yamiben. Yes, Amiben.
Yes, one, that there might be some way where there is a the committees that are noting the deaths, the methodology may be questionable. That may be one thing. But second thing which I would like to point out, that there is a matter going on in the Gujarat High Court, and the government has tried to downplay the crisis. So there is a kind of a doubt somewhere. And why would a government which is equipped with everything cannot give the right figures? So this is one very important point I would like to make, that what is there to hide? Why should you not come up with the correct numbers? And if these are the factual data given by news reports, why should the government not tell the exact number of deaths and be very clear as the crisis is?
No, that is the question. That is the question, Dr. Mavlankar, that this is what, I mean, I have to say, full credit to the Gujarati press and people like Deepak Patel for, pointing out the gap. Like they said, in these 10 Gujarat districts on just one date, 20th May, there's a 7-time gap. Official records, 30 deaths in these 10 districts. Local media have counted on basis of Crematoria and other sources, 231 deaths. That's a pretty big gap.
Yeah, so let me point out that we have a Registrar General of Birth and Death at national level, and at state level there is a Registrar of Birth and Death. At the city level there is Registrar of Birth and Death, and it is their job to analyze the data of birth and death, publish the reports, and no one of those, neither the central nor the state registrars, because doctors will classify. Suppose doctors make a mistake, then it is the Registrar of Birth and Death's job to correct it. So Registrar of Birth and Death has to publish the total deaths by cause, by age, by sex, and no city, no country, I mean no state has been doing it regularly. So that is a legal requirement. And even Registrar of Death General, we haven't heard in this whole discussion. So I think we have to see who is responsible to register deaths and classify them and bring to the public notice as per the Act of Birth and Death Registration. And if there is some mistake happening at some
fair enough, you're right, you can't, you have to,
then it has to be rectified.
Right, you're saying that they should, other stakeholders also
and
should
ICMR
come
has
into
guidelines.
play.
ICMR has clear guidelines.
Enough.
So if those guidelines are not followed, it is the registrar job to reject such death certificates.
To make sure that they are followed. Okay, all right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight. We're completely out of time, and thank you so much for watching Reality Check. That's all the time we have tonight.